Hi everyone, and welcome to this recording of how to use AEM's content transfer tool to migrate pages and assets, basically any type of AEM content, from an on-premise or an Adobe Managed Services AEM instance to one running in AEM as a cloud service. So this video actually picks up from our repository migration videos where we took an AEM 6.5 project, converted it to one that is compatible with AEM as a cloud service, and then ran it through a pipeline in Cloud Manager to install that converted project into AEM as a cloud service and get it running there. So that project was actually the AEM weekend site, and this is what is currently opened in my on-premise AEM instance. So what we're going to do today is we're going to use the content transfer tool to migrate all this into Cloud Manager. Into AEM as a cloud service. So we can actually access that environment in which the repository that we migrated is now sitting. So again, this was an AEM 6.5 repository project that we migrated using AEM's repository modernizer tool, and it's now running in AEM as a cloud service, and it's right over here. Obviously, as you can see, it already has all the pages in it. So why would we migrate it? Well, the reason is because these pages are here because they were part of the AEM project, right? So when we downloaded the project from GitHub, it came with a UI.content Maven module, as AEM projects always do. And in that module, it had the entire site structure and all the assets. In reality, that's not actually a realistic way to deploy a site. Usually when we deploy a Maven project through a pipeline, what we're actually doing is we're installing code, right? And when we talk about code in AEM, we're talking about components, we're talking about templates, we're talking about backend OSGI components also, and all that gets installed through a pipeline, but we want to actually decouple that from the code itself, right? So usually we run a pipeline to install the code, and then content gets migrated in a different format, right? It gets moved over by a package, or it gets created on the environment itself, right? So we might use a pipeline to install the code, and then once it's installed, authors then go in there and start using those templates and components in AEM's authoring environment to start to create the content. And then whenever we want to move that content to another instance or environment, we generally use another method other than the pipeline itself. Usually that's done with packages. The reason we're not using packages in this case is because when we want to migrate an entire site like this, especially if there's a lot of assets, packages do have limitations in terms of how much content can actually be migrated over. So when we're trying to migrate an entire site into AEM as a cloud service, especially when we're migrating from on-premise or Adobe Managed Services into AEM as a cloud service, Adobe doesn't recommend the use of packages because of those limitations, and they do recommend the use of the content transfer tool, which is what we're going to go over today. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and delete this entire site. And it's going to let me know that there are a whole bunch of pages that are depending on it, of course. No problem. And in the meantime, I'm also going to delete all the assets. Because in reality, we don't actually want all these pages and assets to enter in here using the pipeline, which is how they got in here. We want to simulate a more realistic scenario. All right, so we're going to delete the main weekend site folder and the main weekend site itself. So this is going to take a little bit of time. Obviously, there's a lot of content here, so that's gonna, yeah, you can see it's the unpublication is pending, which is what you can see here. Over here on the site side, the deletion did complete, so you can see we only have campaigns, and the assets are probably going to take a little bit more time to delete. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kickstart the content transfer process. And it's not just as simple as clicking on a site and saying migrate. there's actually a few steps, so I can do those in parallel safely without interfering with the deletion process that's happening on the cloud. So in order to actually start a migration process, what we have to do is we have to work with the content transfer tool, which lives inside of the operations module. It doesn't come out of the box. It is something that you have to install through the package manager. So generally speaking, that means that you have to go to the software downloading portal, download the content transfer tool, and install it via package manager. Once you do that, it will appear here in the operations section. So we can go in here, click on content migration, click on content transfer, and from here, you can see that we actually did, I have an existing one that I did previously. I'm going to delete this. I want to start from absolute scratch. And then we can say click, we can go ahead and create a new migration set. So here we're going to call it weekend migration. So a migration set, basically what this is a set of paths that we want to migrate from this on-premise environment into the one that's in AEM as a cloud service. It's going to take a couple steps, so we got to give it a name. Then we need to input the URL of the destination author instance. So it does have to be an author instance. We don't want to migrate directly to a publish instance. What we would do is we would migrate to author and then publish this content. So there it is. And then it's going to prompt us to open an access token. So in order for this to work, you need to be logged in to the author environment, and you also need to be a part of the administrators group. So let me simulate that a little bit. So let me first sign out. And if we click on open access token right now, it's going to prompt us to sign in. So basically what this does is it tries to talk to the author instance and AEM as a cloud service and invoke an endpoint that's going to generate a token that's going to allow the on-premise server to talk to the one in AEM as a cloud service. So I need to log in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. The other thing that you'll need to do is you'll need to make sure that your user is a part of the administrators group. So now that I'm logged in, you can see it's offering me this token. So what I would do is I would copy this and paste it into here. And you can see it's testing the connection, and it did pass. I guess it's not letting me use the name weekend migration again. I thought I guess maybe it saves that somewhere, even though I did delete it. So I'm just going to rename this weekend-migration. Okay, can't do that either. How about weekend migrations? There we go. Okay, plural. Great. So I've got my name, I've got my URL, I've got my access token. Again, in order for this to work, you do have to be a part of the administrators group. So did I just get signed out? Okay, let's try that again. Oh, wrong place. Okay. What's going on? Okay, there we go. So in order to make sure that you're part of the administrators group, what you want to do is you want to go into security here and in the tools section and into users, and then find your user. So here I am, and in my groups, you can see that administrators is one of them. Basically what you want to do in here is start typing in administrators, and it'll pop up, and then you can add yourself to it, and then click save and close. Okay. So that's that. So that token will not appear unless you're part of that group. It'll give you an error. So that's that. You've got some another option here to include the versions. So this is basically all the versions of the content that exist in the server. If you include versions, it does take a lot longer because there's a lot more content to pull through. I'm going to omit this for now because we're just doing a test. And lastly, you want to put in the paths. So generally, when I do this, it's important to think of all the authorable content that you want to move. Basically, everything that does not come in through a pipeline. And also, you want to omit your users. There's a separate way to migrate your users, and we'll go through that in a different video. So, what isn't included in a pipeline? Well, for example, obviously you've got your site itself. So, the weekend root. Then you've got the root in your DAM. So again, we can root over here. Then you might have, sometimes templates aren't included in the pipeline either. Some clients don't include the templates because they truly want to keep them editable on the target environment. So if you've got power users that are actively making changes, and obviously it's not a good idea to actively make changes to your template, but if changes are being made to the templates, then it's a good idea to keep them outside of the code base so that they don't get overwritten with the next push. So maybe you do want to include in here conf slash, where are we here? Conf slash weekend. And then you've got, yeah, conf slash weekend. You might also have some tags that you want to include. So we can go in here and find the tag root for, oops, we don't want the whole thing. Content slash CQ tags slash weekend. Okay, there we go, our custom tags. The other thing that you probably want to migrate are your experience fragments. So if we look into our experience fragments, we have a root here for content also. So basically all these bits and pieces, these are elements that are created on the servers themselves, on the AEM servers themselves by users using the interface, whether it's the authoring interface or the DAM interface or the tags interface. They're created here. They are not created like code is in an IDE by developers. So that's the kind of mindset you want to have when you're migrating this. So now that all this is done, my migration set is complete. I'm going to save this, and it's going to show up over here in my list. Okay, so I guess this actually hadn't been deleted, which is why I couldn't reuse that name. Okay, so there's a number of steps that you go through. So first of all, it's always a good idea to run a size check on your migration set before starting it. This is going to give you a sense of how long the migration is going to take, if there are any issues with the content, and if there is enough space on the target instance to actually accept all this content. So I'm going to run this first and foremost and give it a little bit of time. You can see the size check is running. I'm going to pause the recording here and come back when this is done. Okay, so the size check is complete. We can get the report by clicking on check size once again, and you'll see the size that we're working with locally, and we'll see how much space is available on the target server. So obviously hundreds of gigabytes available over there and a tiny little migration here. So no problem with this migration. If anything does change with the content in between size checks, you can click size check again or check size, and it'll run this process one more time. So now that this is done, I can start my extraction. As you can see, there's an extraction here that says failed. What I did while the recording was paused is I turned off my Wi-Fi and I attempted an extraction just to see what would happen. It does require an active internet connection because it does actually save the extracted content into Azure. So it does need that connection. So let's try it again now that I'm connected. I'm going to run the extraction, and a couple steps here. Basically, we can overwrite the staging container during extraction. So this is usually a good idea. You want to clear any previous extraction content from over there. The other option is to pre-copy the data store to your staging container. This actually requires a pre-copy step, and this would be used if we were using an external data store to store our content from this AEM instance. So that happens when we've got gigabytes, hundreds of gigabytes of content, which obviously isn't the case here. So I'm not using any form of external data store, which would be like an Amazon S3 or an Azure data store. Not using any of that, so it's not enabled for me. So I'm going to go ahead and click extract. There is a warning here that asks me to execute user mapping before starting the extraction. The reason for that is because obviously content has permissions associated with it, and so if you then migrate this content without also migrating the users, there might be permissions assigned to users that can come through. This is just, again, a bare bones AEM instance. I'm just running the weekend sample project, so I'm just running as admin. So this step isn't necessary. So I'm going to go ahead and run the extraction, and you can see the status here. You can also follow the log if you would like and see how it's doing. So I'm gonna let this run and pause the recording, come back when it's done. All right, so the extraction is complete. That means that all the content has been sent to Azure's data store from our source AEM instance here. We can follow the logs here and see this is our final report. It kind of gives us a sense of how long that took. And we can now start the ingestion process. So again, our migration set is selected. We click on ingest. A couple options here too. The first one is whether or not to wipe the existing content on the cloud instance before ingestion. Generally, I keep this off. This will literally clear your entire server and just replace it with the content of this migration set. I guess the assumption, if you're doing this, is that you're installing the content and you'll install the code with a pipeline. That's not our case here. We already have the code on there. We want to keep it there, so we're just installing the content. And this content that we have will overwrite any existing content, so it's not like we don't actually have to clear it for this to take its place. Second step here, we want to ingest content to the author instance. Well, we can do the publish one later. Lastly, pre-copy data store to cloud instance. This is generally used to pre-copy it for large deployments. It'll make the transfer faster to already have it there. Since our migration is really small, it's not necessary to pre-copy it. The transfer isn't going to be affected by moving it straight into the author instance. Lastly, there's an important note here, and just gives you a sense of how this functions. Right, during the ingestion, the author deployment is scaled down and will be unavailable. So you will not be able to use the author instance while this is happening. It also recommends that you log a support ticket with customer care to make sure that it's taken off the cloud service. So I'm not going to do that, obviously, but just keep in mind, if you're running with large deployments, make sure that you're doing it, the migration at a time where the author instance is unlikely to be used. Okay, so both these are turned off and we're sending the content to the author instance. So I'm going to go ahead and start the ingestion. And once again, this is going to take a little bit of time. This too has a log that we can follow by clicking on the status, which is taking a while to load. So anyway, I'm going to stop the recording and I'll come back and show both the log and, oh, okay, well, there you go. So it's probably not ready for the log to be traced. Yeah, I will come back to the recording when this is done. Okay, the ingestion is still happening. It does give us some updates here, as you can see in the author ingestion column. It's currently scaling our instance down, and we can click on this again to get an update within the log. So at this point, the author instance is going to start to become unusable. So as you can see, it's just kind of spinning here. And if I were to try to access it, it's currently hibernated. So it's in the process of being taken down. And once it's been removed, the actual ingestion will take place. So again, going to pause it and come back when that's done. Okay, the ingestion is still happening, but just an update here. So as you can see, while it's happening, it kind of removes all capabilities of the migration set. It clears up the size check, the extraction process, the author ingestion, and when we select it, it just gives us the option to stop the ingestion. So if you see this, nothing to worry about. This is actually a similar view to the view I had when I wasn't connected to Wi-Fi. So in that case, also everything was blocked. So anyway, it's still happening, and this is totally normal. All right, so we're back, and the ingestion has completed, as you can see, based on the finished status here. Clicking on the status will, as always, give us the log. And if we scroll to the very bottom, we'll get a sense of the quantity that was migrated. Okay, so that's basically it, or we're done. And as you can see, if we were to refresh the author instance now and go back into the sites module, our entire weekend site is back. All our pages are back after we initially deleted them. Same, of course, with the assets. So here we are in the DAM, and our weekend site folder has also been returned. So our content transfer has now been successfully completed from our on-premise instance into our AEM as a cloud service instance. And it was done using the content transfer tool, which, as mentioned, is the recommended approach over packages with the migration to AEM as a cloud service. Thank you.